Forget everything you think you know about Vikings. Start with the horned helmets. Please, just get them out of your head. They were never real. That look was a complete fabrication, a piece of costume design invented for a 19th century German opera to make the characters look more menacing. But the biggest myth about the Vikings, the one that has been carefully protected for over a century, might be the one you still believe is an unshakable truth. It's an image that has been seared into our collective consciousness by 1,000 movies, TV shows, and comic books. The Viking. You know the one, a towering, monolithic warrior with hair like spun flax, and eyes as cold and blue as a glacial fissure. A man born from an isolated, storm-lashed land of snow and fjords. This image is powerful. It's undeniably iconic, and it is almost completely, fundamentally wrong. History isn't a simple story. It's never a straight line from A to B. It's a messy, impossibly complex tapestry. And for centuries, some of its most fascinating threads have been deliberately cut, hidden away, or simply ignored until they were forgotten. So what if the world of the Vikings wasn't some remote bastion of ethnic purity, but a sprawling, chaotic, multicultural hub, a superhighway of trade and warfare, where ideas, goods, and people from every corner of the known world converged, clashed, and combined? What if, among the deafening roar of the shield wall and the terrifying axe-wielding raiders who held Europe in a grip of fear, there were other faces? What if warriors from the continent of Africa fought, bled, died, and perhaps even led, right alongside the Norsemen? This isn't a fantasy. This isn't a modern reinvention. The evidence has been there all along, hidden in plain sight, in the soil of a quiet English riverbed, in the brittle pages of Irish chronicles, and now, revealed in the very genetic code of the Vikings themselves. Today, we expose the secret story of the African warriors of the North, and we unravel the powerful reasons why history chose to forget them. The Viking stereotype is one of the most stubborn and politically charged in all of history. This vision of a single uniform people, a distinct race, bursting out of Scandinavia to terrorize the world. It's a convenient story, a simple one, but it's a narrative that completely and utterly crumbles under the immense weight of modern science. And the hammer that is shattering this myth is the incredible revolution in studying ancient DNA, or aDNA. This technology is doing for history what the telescope did for astronomy. It is allowing us to see what was previously unimaginable, and is forcing us to rewrite the book on who the Vikings actually were. Think about that for a second. For the first time, we aren't just looking at bones and artifacts and trying to guess. We are reading the biological story of the people themselves. Before now, history was written by the victors, and often rewritten by their descendants to fit a political narrative. But DNA doesn't have a political agenda, it just is, and it's telling a radically new story. In 2020, a colossal 6-year study, the largest of its kind ever undertaken, was published in the prestigious journal Nature, and it dealt a fatal blow to the old myth. Scientists from labs across Europe came together to sequence the genomes of 442 human remains, gathered from Viking-era sites all across their sphere of influence, from the Scandinavian homelands to the British Isles, from Russia to Greenland. The results were not just interesting, they were revolutionary. The lead researcher, the renowned geneticist Professor Eske Willerslev, said it as bluntly as possible: the results changed the perception of who a Viking actually was. The history books will need to be updated. So what exactly did they find that was so earth-shattering? First, the study revealed that the Viking Age itself was a period of intense and surprising genetic mixing. It showed a significant, undeniable flow of genes into Scandinavia from southern Europe and even Asia before and during the Viking Age. The people we call Vikings were already the product of a much more connected and diverse Europe than we ever dared to imagine. They weren't some isolated group of people who just woke up one day and decided to go exploring. They were already a part of a dynamic, interconnected world. Their journeys of raiding and trading didn't start the process of mixing, it only accelerated it. And the study didn't just dismantle the myth of ethnic purity, it shattered the physical stereotype too, that classic marketable image of the blonde-haired, blue-eyed warrior. It turns out that a great many Vikings, perhaps even the majority, had brown hair. The genes for dark hair were found to be common, a direct and stunning contradiction to the pervasive pop culture image. This isn't to say there were no blonde Vikings. Of course there were, but the idea that they were universally fair-haired is pure fiction, a fantasy constructed long after the last longship rotted away. The study also delivered another bombshell, confirming something archaeologists had long suspected. Being a Viking wasn't necessarily about your ancestry at all. It was more of a job description, an identity you could choose to take on. The evidence for this was found in a Viking cemetery in Orkney, Scotland. There, scientists found skeletons buried with magnificent swords and all the high-status grave goods of a powerful Viking warrior. But when their DNA was analyzed, it showed they were genetically much closer to modern Irish and Scottish people than to Scandinavians. They lived and died as Vikings, they were buried and honored as Vikings, but they were not born Norse. What does that tell us? It reveals the profound truth. The Viking world was a melting pot, a fluid culture that absorbed people from the lands they raided and traded with. Being a Viking was about swearing allegiance to a chieftain, wielding an axe and a shield wall, and adopting the culture, not about where your grandparents were born. This genetic picture is perfectly backed up by what we know of their massive trade networks. The Vikings weren't just mindless, bloodthirsty raiders. They were arguably the greatest traders and navigators of their age. Their longships were technological marvels, capable of crossing the unforgiving North Atlantic and sailing up shallow rivers, and these ships were vessels of commerce, just as much as they were instruments of war. From Scandinavia, they pushed down the great rivers of Eastern Europe, establishing a state that would become the origin of modern Russia, the Kievan Rus. These routes were the arteries of a new global economy, connecting the Baltic Sea all the way to the Black Sea, and from there to the glittering ultimate prize, Constantinople, the capital of the Eastern Roman Empire, a city the Norse called Mythologized, the Great City. Another major trade artery, the famous Volga route, linked northern Europe to the Caspian Sea and the very heart of the powerful Islamic world, the Abbasid Caliphate. We know this because Viking hoards, caches of buried treasure found all across Scandinavia and the British Isles, are filled with literally thousands of silver dirhams, Arabic coins minted in far-flung cities like Baghdad, in modern Iraq, and Samarkand in modern Uzbekistan. This wasn't just random, accidental contact, it was a structured, long-distance economic relationship that spanned half the world, and through these sprawling networks, goods from even farther south found their way into Norse hands. The Caliphate's own trade routes reached deep into the African continent. When a Viking warrior traded a bundle of Arctic fox furs for a silver dirham in a bustling Rus market town, he was plugging his world directly into a global economy that stretched all the way to Africa. We've even found artifacts like African ivory in the archaeological digs of Viking Age Dublin. These artifacts are tangible, physical proof of a world far more connected than the old myths would have you believe. And this global network wasn't just a highway for furs and coins, it was a highway for people. And the evidence now proves, beyond any doubt, that among those travelers were people from the continent of Africa. If the Viking world truly was this global crossroads, this melting pot of cultures and genes, then we should expect to find physical evidence of people from faraway lands turning up in unexpected places. For decades, this idea was largely dismissed by mainstream historians, but the clues have been lying dormant in the earth, patiently waiting for science to catch up, and the story begins not with a saga or a sword, but with a skeleton. In the English county of Gloucestershire, a skeleton was unearthed from a riverside site in the town of Fairford. Forensic analysis, using the advanced techniques of osteology, or the study of bones, determined that the remains belonged to a young woman, aged between 18 and 24. Radiocarbon dating placed her death squarely within the Viking Age, sometime between 896 and 1025 AD. But the most startling, paradigm-shifting discovery came from a detailed isotopic and morphological study of her bones. The conclusion was unambiguous. She was of sub-Saharan African ancestry. Stop and consider the enormity of this discovery. This single individual is a profound, undeniable challenge to the entire old story of an isolated Europe. How did a young African woman end up in Anglo-Saxon England during one of the most violent and chaotic periods of its history? The region where she was found was a war zone, a fiercely contested borderland between the English kingdom of Wessex and the Viking-controlled territory of Mercia. Her very presence is an anomaly that the old historical model simply cannot explain, but it makes perfect sense in this new, more complex picture of a deeply interconnected Viking age. Who was she? Was she a trader navigating these dangerous routes, a diplomat on some forgotten mission, or was she a captive, a victim of the far-reaching slave trade? We can't know her personal story, but her existence is an irrefutable fact that history must now accommodate. And while the Fairford woman is one of the clearest and most rigorously studied examples, she may not be alone. Across Viking Age Britain, osteologists have flagged other remains that could potentially rewrite local histories. A male skeleton unearthed from a cemetery in York, the capital of Viking England, which they called Jorvik, shows skeletal features that suggest possible African or mixed ancestry. He was buried sometime between the late 9th and early 11th centuries, his grave indistinguishable from the others in the Christian cemetery. This suggests he wasn't seen as an outsider, but as an integrated member of the community. While some of these cases are still debated by academics, they are forming a pattern. The Fairford woman wasn't a 1 in a billion statistical outlier. She was part of a wider, forgotten phenomenon. This is incredible stuff. The very ground beneath our feet is giving up secrets that were deliberately buried. If you believe this kind of historical detective work is important, hit that subscribe button and join us on this journey. We're dedicated to digging up the facts the history books forgot. Now, from physical bones, we turn to the most compelling piece of text, which comes from the Chronicles of Ireland. Here, in the accounts of monastic scribes, we find repeated, baffling references to a mysterious group involved in Viking raids, the Blaminen. From Old Norse, the term literally translates to blue men, or as most scholars now agree is more likely, black men. For a very long time, historians weren't sure what to make of this. Some suggested it was merely a poetic description of Vikings wearing blue armor, or perhaps painted in woad like the Picts of old. But the context in which the term appears in the Irish annals points to something much more direct and literal. The most dramatic and explicit account is found in the fragmentary Annals of Ireland. These texts describe a massive Viking raid that took place between 859 and 861 AD. A huge fleet, reportedly 62 ships strong, led by the sons of Ragnar Lothbrok, sailed down the coast of Spain, battled their way through the Straits of Gibraltar, and turned south to the coast of what is now Morocco. There, they launched a surprise attack on the kingdom of Nekor. The annals are chillingly explicit. The Vikings sacked the cities, plundered the kingdom, and when they finally left for their long journey home, they took a great host of captives with them. The text says they brought these North African captives, the Moors, all the way back to Ireland. These people, it is now widely believed, were the Blammen mentioned in the Chronicles. This is a stunning piece of information. It is a direct, documented account of Vikings engaging in a large-scale slave raid and transporting a large group of Africans to northern Europe. These people were brought to the Viking stronghold of Dublin, and the annals imply they remained as a distinct group for some time. This wasn't a story of peaceful trade. This was the brutal, horrifying reality of the Viking slave trade. The Blammen weren't a fantasy or a poetic flourish. They were the African victims of a documented historical event. So we have a body in an English river and a chronicle in an Irish monastery. One is the silent scientific testimony of bone. The other is the fragile 1,000-year-old echo of a written word. On their own, you could perhaps question them or dismiss them as aberrations. But taken together, they tell the exact same story. Africans were present in the Viking world. They came through the networks of trade, and they came in the chains of slaves. But if they were there as captives, could they also have been there as something else entirely? Could they have been warriors? To answer that, we have to travel from the cold shores of Ireland to the glittering golden heart of the medieval world. Constantinople, in the heart of the powerful Byzantine Empire, in the great city of Miklagard, served the most famous and feared mercenary unit of the age, the Varangian Guard. For an ambitious Viking warrior, service in the Guard was the ultimate path to unimaginable fame and fortune. They were the personal, elite bodyguards of the Byzantine emperor, a force of foreign warriors prized above all others, for one simple reason: they had absolutely no loyalty to the scheming, treacherous factions of the Byzantine court. Their loyalty was to one man and one man alone, the emperor, who paid them in mountains of gold. The Guard was formally established around the year 988 AD, and for its first century, it was composed almost entirely of Norsemen, Swedes, Danes, Norwegians, and Icelanders. So many fighting men left their homes to join the Guard that a law was eventually passed in Sweden, declaring that a man couldn't inherit his family's property while he was away serving in Greece, the catch-all Scandinavian term for the Byzantine Empire. It was a desperate attempt by local chieftains to stop the brain drain of their best and brightest warriors to the south. The most famous Varangian of all was a man who would leave as a mercenary and return as a king, Harald Sigurdsson, later known to history as Harald Hardrada, the Hard Ruler. Exiled from Norway as a teenager after his brother was killed in battle, Harald made his way down the great river roads to Constantinople, arriving around 1034. He joined the Guard, and through sheer ruthlessness and tactical genius, quickly rose through the ranks. He fought for the emperor all across the Mediterranean, battling Arab pirates in the Aegean, campaigning against Saracen emirs in Sicily, and crushing rebellions in Bulgaria. In the process, he amassed a colossal fortune, so much gold that it was said he had to have it shipped home in several boats. He eventually returned to Norway, seized the throne, and in 1066 died at the Battle of Stamford Bridge, in a fateful invasion of England that is often seen as the dramatic final act of the Viking Age. Harald's story is the blueprint. It shows what was possible for a foreigner in the great city. You could arrive with nothing but the axe on your shoulder, prove your worth in the crucible of battle, and become a living legend. The Varangian Guard was, in essence, a meritocracy of violence. All that mattered was strength, loyalty, and courage. This brings us to the critical question. In this cosmopolitan melting pot of a city, in this elite unit of foreign mercenaries, whose only entry requirement was skill, could African warriors have served? Now, I need to be perfectly clear. There is no surviving document that reads, "Here served Halfdan the Norseman and Jabari from Nubia." No official roster of the Guard has survived the ravages of time, so there is no single direct, smoking gun piece of paper. However, the case built from inference, logic, and historical context is incredibly strong. Let's build that case, step by step. First, consider the Byzantine Empire itself. Constantinople was not a European city. It was a world city, the crossroads of Europe, Asia, and Africa. The Byzantine army had a long-standing, established policy of recruiting foreign mercenaries from every known corner of the world. Historical sources are filled with mentions of Armenian heavy cavalry, Turkic horse archers, Frankish knights, and Norman adventurers serving as standard parts of their sprawling military forces. Crucially, this policy explicitly included Africans. There is clear evidence of African soldiers, particularly skilled archers from Nubia, modern-day Sudan, serving in the wider Byzantine army. If the emperor was already trusting and deploying African soldiers in other military units, why would his most elite, most trusted force, the Varangian Guard, be the sole segregated exception? It makes no logical sense. Second, look at where the Varangians actually fought. Harald Hardrada and his Norse comrades campaigned extensively in places like Sicily against Saracen forces, who themselves regularly employed African troops in their ranks. In the brutal chaos of medieval warfare, a skilled warrior captured in battle was often given a simple choice: a swift execution or a new life of service in the army of his captors. For an empire like Byzantium, which was in constant need of good fighting men, recruiting a proven, battle-hardened fighter was always a good option, no matter where he came from. It's not just possible, but highly probable, that skilled African warriors captured in these campaigns were integrated into Byzantine military structures, including the circles around the prestigious Varangian Guard. Third, and most importantly, is the very ethos of a mercenary unit. The Guard valued one thing above all else: martial prowess. They were axemen, specialists in brutal shock combat. When you are standing in a shield wall, muscles screaming, heart pounding, waiting for the enemy to hit your line, you do not care about the ancestry or the skin color of the man standing next to you. You care about one thing: can he hold his ground? Will he stand and fight with you? To turn away a skilled warrior who could hold an axe and guard the emperor's life simply because of where he was from would be completely antithetical to the entire purpose of the Guard. We have proof of this flexibility. After the Norman conquest of England in 1066, so many elite Anglo-Saxon warriors fled their conquered homeland that they went to Constantinople and became a dominant element in the Guard for a time. This proves its composition was fluid. It absorbed the best fighters wherever they came from. While we may never have the name of a specific African Varangian, the circumstantial evidence is immense. The multicultural nature of the Byzantine military, the geographical operational theater of the Guard, and the meritocratic, results-oriented nature of mercenary work all point to the same logical conclusion. It is highly probable that black warriors stood in the ranks of the Varangian Guard, wielding the same iconic long axe, taking the same oath to the emperor, and carving out their own legends in the great city. They would have been brothers in arms to the Norsemen, sharing in the gold, the glory, and the gore. So we've looked at the groundbreaking genetic proof, the startling archaeological remains, and the revealing textual clues. We've even built the powerful case for black warriors serving in the legendary Varangian Guard. But this leaves one final, fascinating question. How did the Vikings themselves see these people? How did the black man, the Blamoth, feature in their art, their stories, and their imagination? The Norsemen who wrote about them were not modern anthropologists. The very term they used, Blamoth, or blue black man, is itself revealing. In a world with a far less diverse palette of skin tones than our own, the deep black skin of a sub-Saharan African would have been incredibly striking and unfamiliar. The Norse, in their famously direct and literal way, simply described what they saw. The term appears to be descriptive, not necessarily pejorative in itself, though its use in the context of the slave trade obviously carries an inescapably dark weight. But do we see hints of these real-world encounters reflected in the grand tales of Norse mythology and the sagas? The sagas are epic tales of heroes, blood feuds, and incredible voyages, written down in Iceland centuries after the height of the Viking Age, preserving oral traditions. Within these stories, we see a clear and detailed awareness of a world that existed far beyond the shores of Scandinavia. They had a name for the lands of the Abbasid Caliphate, Serkland, which translates to the land of the Saracens. To them, this was not a mythical place like Asgard, the home of the gods. It was a real, tangible destination for traders and mercenaries, like Harald Hardrada. Finding explicitly African characters in the sagas is difficult. The focus is naturally on the adventures and genealogies of Norse heroes. However, some scholars point to fascinating figures that may represent a preserved folk memory of these encounters. In the Urvar Odd saga, a fantastical tale of a legendary hero, Odd battles monstrous sons of the night who come from Serkland. These beings are described as black and inhuman. While this is clearly a work of fantasy, it significantly places dark-skinned, formidable enemies in the context of the Saracen lands, the very same regions where historical Vikings were raiding and fighting. It is entirely possible that real-world encounters with skilled African soldiers in Saracen armies were mythologized over time, transformed by storytellers into supernatural threats to make the hero's victory seem even greater and more glorious. We can also look at characters who represent the other within Norse society itself. In the Saga of the Greenlanders, which tells the story of the Viking voyages to North America, we meet a curious character named Thorhall the Hunter. He's described as being dark and black and troll-like, short in stature, and menacing in appearance. Despite his strange and unsettling appearance to the other Norsemen, he's a skilled hunter and a valued, if eccentric, member of the expedition. While the text never explicitly labels him as African, his physical description clearly sets him apart from everyone else. Could characters like Thorhall be a literary echo, a preserved memory of the diverse individuals who were part of the Viking world, their unfamiliar features described using the supernatural language of trolls and other mythical beings? It is speculative, of course, but when placed within the overwhelming context of all the other evidence, it becomes much more plausible. What's absolutely clear is that the Vikings did not live in a bubble. Their world was not hermetically sealed. They fought, they enslaved, they traded with, and they almost certainly fought alongside people who looked, spoke, and believed in gods that were completely different from their own. The pervasive image of the Viking world as a mono-ethnic, racially pure society is a modern political construction, a 19th century invention. It is not a historical reality. So, where does all of this leave us? We began this journey with a myth, a caricature, the pure, blonde-haired, blue-eyed Viking, through the hard science of genetics, the tangible proof of archaeology, and the re-examination of forgotten texts. We have systematically dismantled that myth. In its place, we've built a picture of a much more fascinating and complex reality. The Viking world wasn't a monolith. It was a dynamic, violent, entrepreneurial, and surprisingly multicultural age. The evidence is now undeniable that Africans were present in the Viking world. We know they were there. Their roles were complex, and in many cases, deeply tragic. They were captives, human currency sold in the bustling slave markets of Dublin and other Viking ports. They were perhaps traders, navigating the intricate web of commerce that linked the continents. And, as we've seen, it is overwhelmingly probable that they were warriors, standing shoulder to shoulder with Norsemen in the most formidable and famous fighting force of the era. The erasure of this rich, complex history was not an accident. It was a direct consequence of later centuries, particularly the 19th century, creating a romanticized and ethnically purified version of the Vikings to serve their own nationalist narratives. They built a grand monument to a myth, and in doing so, they buried the real, diverse people who lived and died during that incredible time. History isn't just about what we remember, it's about what we've been forced to forget. The image of the Viking is changing, not because of political correctness or modern fiction, but because of cold, hard facts. The Viking is no longer just a symbol of a narrow Scandinavian heritage, but a testament to a turbulent, interconnected global age. If you believe these hidden histories deserve to be told, then support our work. Hit that subscribe button and ring the bell so you never miss another investigation into the past. We are dedicated to digging up the facts the history books chose to forget, and let us know in the comments what other hidden histories should we uncover next. The trail of evidence, in bone, in text, in gold, and in blood, is finally being re-examined. The Black Warriors of the North, silenced for a millennium, are silent no more.